Hello, everyone. Given that it's now 7:30 on December 8th, I'd like to call to order the meeting of the Concord Municipal Light Board. Our first agenda item is, of course, as usual, our meeting minutes. Gordon has sent around and distributed minutes that are outstanding, and at this time, the minutes that are outstanding are those from July 14th and those of October 13th. So I know July 14th is a ways, seems like a long time ago, but I think they were distributed in October and we didn't vote on them last month. So I'd like to entertain a motion to approve those minutes if people are ready for that.
I move that we approve the minutes of July 14th.
I second.
Pam, thank you. Okay, well, any comments? No. Okay, so we'll take a roll call. Pam?
Yes.
Alice?
Yes.
Gordon?
Yes.
And Wendy is yes, so unanimously approved. Okay, and then the second set of minutes are from October 13th that were also distributed. I don't know if people have comments on those minutes. Nope. All right, well, I will also entertain a motion for those.
I move that we approve the minutes for, what was it, October
13th.
October 13th.
Yeah. Okay.
Seconded. Oh,
Okay.
I'll let Alice second.
Alice, are you going to second?
Yeah.
Okay. All right, roll call. Pam?
Yes.
Alice?
Yes.
Gordon?
Yes.
And Wendy's a yes. So, all right. So those are unanimously approved. So I think
Could I just put out a request to that when minutes get approved, could we try to make an effort to get them posted onto the Concord website within a week, say? And there's a few that have been approved that from earlier meetings that are still not posted.
Yeah, we'll get those.
They were approved, that most of them are posted with the exception of the one in July 9th or 7th, which I know I wasn't there for. So many of them have been there. So I do appreciate that comment because I think that led to some of our confusion about what's approved and what's not. And we didn't have the documentation to validate it. So thank you for that comment. Hi, Brian. Thank you for joining us. Just, you know, we just approved the minutes from July 14th and 13th. Okay. All right. So just as a reminder, so our next meeting is going to be a special meeting for the board in terms of the board, in terms of our 2022 budget. So that meeting is going to be December 29th at our regular scheduled time of 7:30, and then it will be 2 weeks. The second Wednesday of each month thereafter in 2022. So keep that in mind, put in your calendar if it's not there already.
I only put up the first 6 months worth, so.
Okay, all right, so about the first 6 months anyways till our next board changes. Okay, so with that, I'd like to just move on to the sort of chairs updates. I have a few comments for you. First, I just want to recognize that for the town meeting, there's an upcoming public hearing on December 16th for the school project. As many of you are aware, that project will be funded to be solar ready, but it does not include all the funding for the solar implementation. Dave will provide an update on that later in the agenda, but I want people to be aware of that topic, and hopefully you'll attend the December 16th meeting. With that in mind, I just also want to acknowledge to the board that for the school project to be successful, we do need to be considering the implementation of the solar installation, and that's partially funded through the CMLP funding. And there's a lot of work that's yet to be done around the design, but for this board, it may be necessary for us to put a placeholder on the warrant for the 2022 town meeting in May. So I'm just mentioning that here. We'll have further discussions in future meetings around that, okay? Just want you to have that on your radar screen. And then also just an acknowledgement that last month, we voted increases in our rates for our citizenry. And we did that mostly in line with our existing philosophy of rates under the cost of service study. Although I know many of us are concerned about our movement toward TOR, in January, we're going to start a process of reviewing our existing rate structure, reviewing the philosophy behind those rates and the design of those rates to position the board to be grounded in our rate structure so that we can then move on and start some education around TOR design and some decision-making around TOR going forward. So that was one of our board goals, to really get that education in place. So we will start that officially in January, but we have a lot of work to do in the meantime before then. So with that update, the other thing that I wanted to provide an update to the board on actually is around the broadband completion committee. And Gordon, I'm going to ask for you to sort of provide a brief update on that, because I just want to make sure the board's aware of those activities.
Sure. So the theme, I'd say, if the committee so far has a theme in our thought process, it's been that subscriber growth is kind of a virtuous cycle where it supports increased revenues, and then with those revenues you can do more. And we definitely are in a phase of the business where we want to do everything we can in order to maximize that growth. And finding ways to fund the growth and so forth. And it drives down unit costs. And with that, once you have a larger base, which we, to a certain extent, we've already accomplished, that provides a basis for more difficult projects, higher levels of service. The only trouble is that growth costs money, meaning you basically have to hire people in order to do those installations. And there's also just kind of a long-term dynamic of the business in the sense that some expenses do trend down over time. Bandwidth has been coming down in cost, but other costs like materials and salaries and so forth trend upwards. So you actually have to keep growing in order to keep ahead of the costs that are continuing to rise. So there's a lot of reasons for it, but subscriber or installations dropped recently. I'll give you some annual increases in the install base. Between 2017 and 2021, it increased 30%, 22%, 14%, 5%, and 3%. Now that last 3% is just January through September of this year. But anyway, you can see the problem. What can be done? What are the risks if we don't turn that around? I think we're making some efforts to do so, making successful efforts to do that. One of the things that the committee is going to try to do, the task force, is try to offer some metrics to the light board and to staff to help understand the business on an ongoing basis that people can track and be aware of. One obvious metric is the backlog. Well, the first metric is the one that I just mentioned, how quickly installed base is increasing. Backlog, profitability. We have the budget review process, but we may, it might be worth thinking about ways to keep an eye on profitability. Costs, break-even time per installation, cost per installation, cost per subscriber. What's the attrition rate? There's another thing that the task force is interested in. We haven't asked for this yet, but could we take a look at some of the history of our early encounters, case histories? People might have contacted Concord Broadband with interest. There are some tracking documents and so forth that get created at that first encounter. We'd like to take a look at those to get a sense of, what did they complete? Did they not complete? Why? How many of them? So other things to watch. competitive landscape. I mean, we, in a sense, are competing against Comcast, but what else is going on in the market? This is something that we need to keep an eye on. The board and staff need to keep an eye on. And, you know, are there funding opportunities? For instance, Sudbury just recently won $89,000 to expand the municipal fiber optic network in their town. There's also something that's called something like the Massachusetts Municipal Fiber Grant, GAPS grant. So there may be some money out there. There could be some money having to do with some of the bills that have passed in Congress lately that may trickle down to Massachusetts and to us. At some point, the business is going to start to stop. The growth rate is going to eventually slow down as we reach some kind of saturation level. You know, at that point, then we may, anyway, we want to be aware of when we start to move into that. We're obviously nowhere close to that. Another thing would be, are we really serving the town in terms of equity? Are we fairly serving all of the constituencies in town? And, you know, one thing that we've talked about is whether or not, you know, condos and developments and multi-unit dwellings are being underserved right now. Is that something that we need to actually really consider? Another form of equity to think about is affordability. As it turns out, Comcast has a program that's, I think, supported by some government money that provides subsidies to low income. We don't have anything like that. Do we need that? That's a policy question. You know, another thing just to keep an eye on is value. Are there opportunities to offer more value than we currently are? You know, we have a basic slate of services that we're providing to residences and businesses. There's a small amount of business that Broadband is doing kind of on the side that is basically just networking, just carrying traffic for, I think, for some larger businesses. You know, are there some opportunities there? There may be other opportunities too, in terms of like expanding the service offerings. And, you know, to the extent that we could maybe think of ourselves as not necessarily being a direct competitor to Comcast, but actually offering a set of services that are complementary to what they offer, might be. Another thing is that if some of those services that we offer are complementary to Comcast, then maybe people might be interested in subscribing to both. Now, what am I thinking about? I don't have a great idea or a very solid idea, but it could involve resiliency, or households wanting redundancy. So as a board, we're going to be needing to think about policy decisions coming from town meeting, from the select board, from the board, and from staff, from executive staff. What are the goals of Concord Broadband? Excellent service, or is it basically just supposed to really generate a really big return, a payment in lieu of taxes? I mean, that kind of decision is really a strategic one, a policy one. You know, or are the goals to just do what we're doing, do kind of maybe a minimum, and as long as we're doing that, then Comcast is more likely to provide the reasonably good service it already is. So sort of just keeping them competitive. Or is there something more? Are we going to really target really excellent service? Another thing is, you know, costs could be coming down as broadband drops in price. So there could be potentially a scenario where subscriber costs could actually be reduced over time. Now, would that fit within the policy guidelines? You know, do we have an intention to try and to use these changes and effects in order to benefit subscribers, or would that generate more profit that would go back to the town? are we even going to try to be a must carry? Like, would we say to the town of Concord, look, if you want Comcast, if you want Concord broadband, we'll make a commitment to make sure that we'll make it available to your home? Or is it more of the right now we're not quite at that stage yet? Target number of subscribers, we're maybe 1,500. Do we want more? What's the desired anyway? I think I've covered, we spent a lot of time talking about Concord Green. We have a representative from Concord Green. There's basically a negotiation standoff there within that community, and then between that community and us. And what is our obligation, or what are our opportunities to find ways to break that logjam? Maybe, I don't want to be the one that comes out and says, hey, Concord ought to kick in a piece of the installation cost without, talking to you guys and getting a sense of the town, if that's something that we want to do. But if we did head down that path, I could imagine a metric that says, well, a second ago I was talking about what's the cost per installation. If we could offer a deal to a group that would come in under the average cost per installation, but does involve some cost sharing, then that could be a win-win, right? Because we're actually, if it came in below, then we're actually making more money on this group than we would otherwise. There are some streets in Concord that are served by Eversource. They're hard to get to. These are not served by Concord Broadband either. So there's a question: do we want to try and find some way to route a path to those streets? And finally, one other thought is regionalization. Would the future of Comcast broadband include serving nearby areas? And back to that virtuous circle I was talking about, if we can grow the business, have a larger subscriber base, then potentially the per subscriber cost can come down, we can have more staff, and we could fund more innovative projects. So anyway, that's kind of some of the things that we're thinking of. I can't give you any specific details of any findings other than just to say that those are some of the things we're thinking about. We're going to present some findings to the select board, and we'd like your input, like we would like the light board's input, and certainly Concord staff, their input as we move forward.
So Gordon, thank you. I think that's a good, you covered a lot of topics, and the committee's obviously been pretty busy looking at a lot of things. And, the idea of tracking metrics and the comments also get to the point of what is our strategy for broadband. And I think that's really a goal for the board, really to be considering. And I think we'll look forward to more of the updates as the committee goes forward. Do we have any sense of when the presentation to the select board is going to be? I know there was a 6-month time frame, so that was February in my last thinking, but
I think we're still going to try and target January or February for I know that's really close. I mean, it's December already. So basically, I think it's pretty soon we're going to stop exploring new topics and start trying to consolidate what we've learned.
Okay, well, we'll just you'll have to keep us in the loop if there's a point in time where we need to be providing feedback. So
Okay.
we do have our meeting end of December, and then we have early January, and those are the main opportunities. So just keep that in mind. Okay. All right. So I'm going to do my best to stay on time today for our agenda, because we've deferred a lot of things in our last meeting. So I'm going to keep us moving along. Dave, you're up next with the director's update. And thank you, Gordon, by the way. Good update.
You do have, and David Allen has his hand raised. I don't know if you want to.
Sure. David, quick comment.
Get unmuted. Wendy, I don't know if you want to take time. There certainly one key question out of according to bringing us up to date. You want to take time now or later? What's your pleasure?
So I think my preference, David, actually is to wait till the end of the meeting, if you don't mind. I want to make sure that we get through our agenda today.
Let's do that. Thanks.
Okay, thanks. I appreciate that, Dave. All right. So back to David Wood.
All right, thanks. The Concord Clean Comfort Program has now received over 200 coaching requests, averaging one request every 2 days since the program began in late February. Over 80% of those who request coaching services follow through and meet with a coach for 163 engagements to date. Our commitment in the DEED grant from American Public Power Association was to carry out 150 coaching engagements in 18 months. We've now achieved that 6 months early, so that's great. The average time from client meeting to heat pump installation is about 3 months, and 19% of those clients who met with a coach at least 90 days ago have installed a heat pump. We're aiming to exceed ABODE's closure rate across MLP territories they serve, where 30% of consultations result in heat pump installations. We're experimenting with a variety of follow-up measures to bump up the number of requesters who meet with coaches and the number of clients who install heat pumps. So that's really, really good. On November 25th, we had an outage at Emerson Hospital. A squirrel got into the switchgear and caused some catastrophic damage to the primary cubicle where the main feed comes in. The damage was so significant that the auto transfer did not happen. As you probably recall, there's 2 dedicated feeds to the hospital with an auto transfer. And so the damage did not allow the transfer. So we had to call in our maintenance and testing company to help us manually transfer that over. The worst part about the whole thing is during the outage, the hospital's generators failed. So they were without power for about 45 minutes, pretty chaotic. Fortunately, we were able to get that backup circuit on, which is currently feeding the hospital. And given the extensive damage, we brought in the switchgear manufacturer to evaluate the cubicle and provide guidance on our approach to making the repairs. We also we've met with Emerson to go over what's happened and what needs to happen going forward. And we had a meeting yesterday. It was a good meeting. So we'll keep moving forward with that. We have been getting repair equipment in, and there's a couple items we're a little bit concerned with lead time, but we'll keep working on that. So that's a high priority for us. The other thing is we do have a third circuit that's over there that we can feed the hospital with. So we're really concerned and really want to get that repaired as soon as possible. Inventory, our annual inventory happened the week of Thanksgiving, which I highlight because we have over $1 million worth of inventory, and we had the best inventory numbers that we've had since I've been here, with less than 0.5% of adjustments. So that was really good. I was going to mention rates, but Wendy already did that. On the only thing I'll add on the rates is I think the first step in that whole process is doing an educational piece on the existing rates so that the board has a good foundation to work off of. And then on the personnel side, on December 1st, Rick Fidelli was hired. He started as a first-class line worker. So we now have 2 positions open, moving in the right direction there. And the last piece is I'd like to introduce Amanda Cohn, our sustainability director. She wasn't able to make the last meeting because she was at the middle school meeting. So Amanda, I don't know if you want to say a few words.
Yeah, I will just say hi to keep us on the agenda, but if you'd like to set up a time to quickly meet or touch base, I'd love that. My email is the standard Concord email, akohn@concordma.gov. I'm at 55 Church Street on the 2nd floor. I'm looking forward to working with you all and excited to hear about the current updates. And yeah, I'll keep it brief for now, but happy to answer any questions or, like I said, meet at a later date.
That's great. Thanks, Amanda. Welcome aboard. You've got your hands full. Lots to learn. So, yeah, thanks, Gordon. All right, so Dave, if you're done, we can move on right to the broadband update. I don't know if that's Greg. Do I see
Yep,
him?
Greg's going to do it.
Yeah, okay.
Good morning.
Morning.
I'm not going to go through the broadband, the update I sent you. Instead of, I'm just going to move on to some of the topics that are we've just started going on. Looking into, we have an RFP that will be published today for a new help desk, or in search of a help desk. We have a 3-year contract, which is we want to try to get ahead of. The RFP is available today. We have a informational teleconference on the 17th. Proposals will be due for the 14th, and we're expecting to sign a new contract early February. We have submitted the number for the core upgrade under the telecom section of the budget for 2022. And also just to talk quickly what Gordon had mentioned, I have been involved in the APPA funding seminars. So just recently, so kind of a timely thing. And I think that's pretty much the update for broadband. Any questions?
That was quick. So I'm just checking on the funding for the core design device. What was that dollar figure again, Greg?
115 is the number that we came up with, but we put it in for 120 just to.
Okay. Yeah, and that was last month. Okay.
Mhm.
All right, it hasn't changed. Okay.
No, and that's in the forecasted budget. So we'll go
Okay.
over that on the 29th in a little more detail. But
Yep. Okay, that's helpful. I expected we would, so thank you. Appreciate that. Does the board have any questions for Greg, broadband? No, okay. All right, well, moving right along, and I think in keeping with sort of questions around funding, we wanted to have a review of the fund balance. Not necessarily as much the policy, it hasn't really changed, but we do want the board to be aware of the current balances and what those amounts are. I'm sure we may hear it again next month at the budget meeting, but if we, Dave, who's going to give that review? Is that Matt?
yeah, it'll be Matt, myself, Greg.
Okay. Okay, I guess.
The standard way we normally do it.
Yeah, okay. All right, well, I think we're ready to move on to that agenda item. The board has that handout that was distributed. Assume we're going to reference that.
Dave, will you give me permission to share, please?
I just did.
Okay. Good morning. I'm going to go over 2 documents that were included in the board packet. The first one is just a summary of where we're at as far as our fund balances at September 30th, 2021. And the other one is the policy document. If you remember back in February of 2020, we deliberated over this policy and then approved it. I'm going to skip down to the 3rd page of this document where it starts with restricted funds. The first fund is the Depreciation Fund. This fund is whenever we spend $1 in depreciation expense, we also set aside $1 to be used for future capital. We put a restriction on this fund between 1 million and 6 million, and we are currently just under the top end of 5.8 million. However, I want to point out that about almost 900,000 of this is owed down here to the operations fund. We switched the way we reimburse the operations fund. And we do it when the WIP, the construction project is capitalized rather than when the dollar is spent. So there's a little bit of a lag there. The next fund is the emergency repairs fund. This is really kind of just a rainy day type of fund. I don't believe we've ever touched the monies in this account. And we put a restriction between $1 million and 1.5 million, and we're currently at 1.1 in this fund. The next section is the debt service fund. Every month we set aside a chunk of money to pay for the semi-annual interest payments and annual principal payments on our debt, outstanding debt. There isn't really a way to restrict this one because it's just based on what our future debt schedules call for. So we currently have about 658,000 in this funds, I should say. Next is the power supply reserve. This is related to the thing we always talk about whenever we're talking about budget and financials, which is the rate refund, where we set aside the difference between the cost of power and what we charge for that power in the rates. We limited this to between 2 and 3 months power supply cost. We are currently at 3.1 million. However, based on our plan, we will be at 1.9 million at the end of the year, which is a little over 1 month of power supply. So we are draining that fund down, but that was planned because of the cost of power we knew was going to be going up. Moving on, Renewable Energy Certificates Fund. We set aside the cash related to the increased charge that I think we put in 3 years ago, two or 3 years ago, to collect for RECs. We didn't put a restriction on this fund. However, it's supposed to just be whatever we've brought in less what we've spent. We are currently at almost 2.6 million with that fund. I'm sure that we're going to be purchasing some RECs pretty soon here as we get as that activity kind of picks up around year end. The next one is underground fund. We set aside 1.5% of each customer bill to be used for taking future overhead lines and putting them underground. Oh, sorry. I don't believe we put a restriction on this one, but we generally build it up to about 2.5 million and then spend it down. We're currently just under 2 million, and we have some plans, hopefully in 2022, to use some of these funds in some projects that we have been sitting around for a while. So that is the end of the restricted funds. Now we get to the unrestricted, which is just really the leftover cash that we have on hand. We called for this to be about 2 to 3 months of total expenses. As you'll see, we're quite a bit under that as we have a negative balance. I will mention again that about 875,000 is owed to this fund, which is the 875 is what's in the WIP account. I wanted to just quickly mention that we also have about almost 2.9 million sitting with E&E for our power costs, which I would net with this as our unrestricted. So and I think that's it. Are there any questions on these fund balances?
Just to clarify one thing that Matt said, the CIP is construction work in progress. And so when you have a capital project that's happening, it gets put into that account. So it doesn't hit the capital item. The stuff is actually in service, then it gets transferred over.
Okay. So Matt, just to review these funds, if I recall, depreciation obviously is used for planned capital projects. So right now, netting out the CIP, it's about 5 million, which is sort of at the upper threshold of your funding. So we do have capital projects planned. But Dave, do we, and maybe we can do this at the budget level. So in terms of known capital projects over the next couple of years.
So we have a list of capital projects, and over the last 20 months, those have really slowed down based on the way we're operating, and then based on our staffing numbers. So we expect that number to draw down as we start pushing some of these projects.
Yep. So I guess when we think about our inventory, we've had some funding for broadband, but this may be a potential source for some of that. Is that a fair statement? Because this is the light plants fund, or is this strictly for the light plant and not broadband?
This is on the electric side.
Right. Okay. That's what I just want to clarify that, right? And so these other funds, the renewable energy certificate obviously is funded based on our policy of funding. And the power supply reserve, I know while it might feel like there's a lot there, that is something that we will adjust as needed, right? Isn't there a rate that funds that and we adjust it periodically as needed?
Yeah, that's part of the power supply cost. It's collected.
Right.
So that's the ratepayers' money. And so that's why it's restricted, and we're using that to set some power costs.
Right. So I'm just reminding people, these aren't funds, they're restricted for our purpose, right? So it's not cash that's available for that broadband project or others. So, and in the unrestricted fund, the prepaid any power fund. So in terms of, and maybe Matt, this is a question, this is a 9/30 estimate. So for year end, do we have any kind of projection over the unrestricted funds?
I think it'll increase by year end, just based on the bills that are paid for this. The winter months will be higher, and we'll collect more money. I would guess it's going to still be negative by the time we get there, but it should get a little bit smaller of a negative.
Okay. And we'll see this conceptually when we do the budget review as well, right? Yeah. Okay. So I guess my walk away from this is, I think for the board's awareness as we think about future funding of projects, these are restricted. We don't have lots of extra funds. There was a time when our unrestricted funds were very high, but they're not right now. So it's not like we have lots of extra cash available for investment. So I guess that's my walk away from this. It used to be a much higher dollar amount in the unrestricted funds. So just awareness building. So, okay, Brian, got a question?
Yeah, I had two questions. One is pretty simple. It's the rec balance. Are we doing quarterly purchases or annual purchases?
We look at it quarterly.
Okay, so that fund, it seems rather high for quarterly. But the other question I had was about the power supply reserve. Having 1 month on hand is concerning, and we just increased rates to compensate for that. Do you feel that the correction in rates that we'll be able to weather that and get back to 3 months of reserve?
That is what we're hoping happens. Get back to 2 months, but it all depends on costs and temperatures and all that. But I do believe with the PCA added onto the bill, we're going to be able to weather the storm. So it's really, time's going to tell. I don't have a crystal ball.
Yeah, well, my concern is not about the long-term numbers, it's about the cash flow. We did the PCA annualized, so those funds will come in over the year, but the expenses will come in during the winter. And we've got we're already at a 1 month reserve. Is that a concern, a moment, in the winter where we find that this balance goes down to an extremely low level?
Yeah, it is a concern. It's something that we keep our eye on. Regular
And,
operation.
and would we be able to dip into other funds that are unrestricted? It should that balance go less than a month or go to zero?
We can dip into unrestricted funds.
Okay. All right. Thank you.
Other questions from the board?
Oh.
I'm not seeing others. Okay, sorry, Laura, I see your hand raised.
I just wanted to clarify for Brian, one of the reasons that rec purchase fund has grown is that even though we make transactions quarterly, payment is not made until delivery of the recs. And so, for example, we just bought some last week, but the delivery date on the recs is prior to June 15th, 2022, when all the recs need to be retired. So we may not actually pay for recs that we've already forward contracted if they aren't delivered until later. So that fund could get even bigger. I just wanted to mention that.
So there's a lag between our obligation to pay for the recs and then the actual payment. That's why the balance is high. Okay, thank you.
That's very helpful, Laura. So it's interesting to know what we might have committed for purchases in that fund too. So maybe that's something for the future we can understand better. Okay. Gordon, you had flashed your hand up a minute ago.
Nope, no thanks.
No, all set, okay. All right, so not seeing any more hands raised. I think we're ready to move on. Dave, you want to speak to the E&E reappointment of the outside directors?
Yep. So the outside directors at Energy New England have a 3-year term. So every 3 years, we come to the board with a vote. And then it goes to all the owning MLPs of E&E. Currently, Tom Whitney, Christian Scorzoni, and Ray Salibi are their terms are set to expire, and the president and CEO has sent this out to all the owners to have their boards vote to have these three outside directors term extended for another 3-year period. I sent around, or I had Karen sent around bios, so hopefully you got a chance to read them. Ray and Tom have been on the board as outside directors since the inception of E&E, and Christian's been on for 3 or 4 years now. I don't know if you have any questions on them. I'd certainly be willing to answer them.
I don't. We've reviewed their history in the past. Brian, you saying
Yeah,
something?
there are no other candidates to consider. So it's a vacancy or an approval.
Right. Yeah, there's no other candidates at this time, but we have been looking for replacement at some point, because at some point Tom and Ray will retire, and so we're looking at that carefully, and trying to find the right people to fill in when those gentlemen retire.
So David, is that a subcommittee of that E&E board that's actually actively looking at it? Or, I mean, are they more reactive on when people are up?
No, we've been talking about it for a while now, so,
Okay.
but yeah, kind of looking at it, like if you looked at Christian's and what he does, he really helps us on the legislative side significantly. So Tom more on the financial side, and been involved with utility industry for most of his career. So they're all very good. Had positive experiences with all of them, and I would hope the board would vote all 3 of them to be continue as outside directors for the next term.
Okay, so Dave, let me just comment. So that we just saw, oh, sorry, there's 3, sorry. So you're looking for a board vote in support of these 3 directors, and I would entertain a motion if people are ready for that.
I have a question.
Alice? Yep,
So
Alice?
let me ask 2 simple questions. The first, are these paid board positions? Are these board
Yes.
members paid? Yet they are.
Yes.
And how many outside directors are there? Are these the only three or are they on staggered terms?
No, there's three outside directors only. The terms just so happen on this one that and Ray have been on the same term since the beginning because they came on at the inception. Christian, when he came on, it just so happened he ended up on the same cycle as them. So normally you'd have the a staggered cycle, but right now we don't. So
Thanks. No more question.
I have a question.
Yep.
I just wonder how much they're paid.
I don't know that off the top of my head, Pamela.
Okay. Is the board ready to make a motion to approve these outside directors? I'll entertain a motion, if so.
I move
Yeah.
that we approve this slate of E&E directors, outside directors.
There's a second.
I'll second.
Thanks, Alice. All right. Discussion? Not seeing any. All right, so I'll take a roll call vote. Alice,
Yes.
Gordon,
Yes.
Pam,
I'm going to abstain. I just don't feel like I read the bios. I think E&E is an important component of our operation. I don't feel, I just don't know enough about this to, and I don't think, so I just can't, I can't vote.
okay, appreciate the comment. Brian?
Yes.
Okay, and Wendy is in support. So we have 4 in support and 1 abstention, so we have board approval. So thank you all. Let me just ask a question, Pam. In the future, when we have these votes, what kind of information might be helpful for you to learn, to have, to be able to feel more comfortable in support of these type of votes?
Normally, I feel that I just had the bios, and I didn't, I don't know what their policies are like. I don't know what their, I didn't know that they were paid. I just feel that in this situation, and I'm very, very, very dependent, and happily so, on Dave's points of view. I just feel like I don't know anything about these people. I also haven't, and perhaps in co-ate sense, that E&E is really important. And so on this particular vote, I didn't feel that I had anything but the bios. And I don't know their policies, but I don't expect or plan to exercise abstention prerogatives often.
I'm just trying to help understand how the board can be as effective as possible. So I appreciate your comment.
I guess the
Gordon?
bottom line is I don't know where these people come from on any of on issues.
From a position pursuit. Okay. All right. And maybe some of that is grounding of the of E&E itself as well. I know we've had some periodic updates on E&E. We'll consider that again in the future. Gordon?
I'm not trying to, I just want to be clear. I'm not
Yeah.
being contrary. There's no message here. It's
Yeah.
just a question of how much I know personally.
I understand. Gordon?
Yeah, and as you mentioned a second ago, Wendy, we have had E&E come in and present to us about the value that they're offering the light plant. And that's a really, really positive opportunity for us to get grounded in what the nature of this relationship is and how beneficial it is. But I suggest that the next time, or over the several next times that we do have these kinds of encounters or presentations from E&E, that we also take a look at the, try and get to use that as an opportunity to answer some of Pam's questions. What is the organizational structure of E&E? What's its makeup? What makes it tick? I don't know, that kind of thing. So anyway, that's all I wanted to say.
Some considerations, kind of difficult to get to people's positions, but we'll consider that at the next time we need to make another vote in support of outside directors. So, okay. All right, well, we're doing well on time. Thank you all, appreciate that. I think we're now ready to move on to the residential assistance rate discussion. So we all know that we did approve rate increases last month across a number of rates. And those range, sort of in the 5% range. Every time we have a rate increase, there's also a corollary discussion around affordability and concerns for citizens who may be challenged by supporting these rate increases. So we thought it would be appropriate to also discuss our residential assistance rate funding and whether that ought to increase in concert with some of the rate increases that we've made. Today's discussion is really a discussion. We're not ready to make a vote today, and as Dave, if we can have a rate hearing in a future meeting, if the board chooses to wants to go down that path, which I'm doing. So I know the rate assistance sheet was distributed as part of the board package. I trust everyone had a chance to look at that. Dave, do you want to speak further to the residential rate structure today and any recommendations?
Yeah, so Laura and I will do that, but I think the piece that we were looking at here wasn't necessarily changing the rate itself. I think that's a further discussion. The structure of the rate, it was more, with the increase, do we want to increase the assistance piece of the existing rate? And Laura, I don't know if you want to add anything to that, but that's what we thought the board might want to consider.
That's what I meant. Sorry, Dave, if I misquoted that. Laura, do you want to speak to that?
So would people find it helpful if we put up on the screen the rate and also talked about what percent off it is of the old rate and what percent it is of the new rate? Would that be helpful?
That'd be very helpful. Thank you.
Okay, let's do that. So I'm going to share my screen. Can everyone see the CMLP website here?
Yep.
Okay, this is a listing of our residential rates, and you'll see that the residential rate, the residential assistance rate rider rate is its own rate. And if we click on that, this should look just like the sheet that was sent to you. And the way it works is we have our regular R1 rates, which I'll put up on the screen in a minute, but whatever the rate is, the prevailing rate is, people on this rate assistance rider, which need to qualify on an income basis, receive a 10 cent per kilowatt hour discount from whatever the prevailing R1 rate is for the first 657 kilowatt hours. After that, people on this rate schedule pay the same R1 rate as people in the R1 rate class. So if we look at I want to do this where it's not going to be too messy. Okay, so I'm going to just bring this over here. This is just a summary sheet of our rates. You don't look at all the busy stuff. Sorry, I want to point you to this. These are the new rates that you approved that would take effect January 1st, 2022. So this is the R1 rate. The regular rate is 16.131 cents for the first 657, and then 17.125 for the next 178, and 19.031 cents for everything over 835. The previous first tranche that's in effect currently and through December 31st of 2021 is 15.911 cents. And so if we look at what percent of the old rate was the 10 cent discount, it was 62.8%. And if you were to not change it and it would stay at 10 cents and the new rate is 16.131, it would drop down to be a 62% subsidy rather than a 62.8% subsidy. So it's a pretty minor difference because this increase is fairly minor. But you could proportionally increase this so that it matched the 62.8%.
So Laura, what would that percent increase be? So in these rates, the total volumetric, that rate increase that we voted was a 5% increase. So I guess sort of two things. What's a 5% increase? Keep going. It looks
Can
like you're
you
doing it.
tell me again, Wendy, what you want?
So what's a 5% increase in the assistance rate?
Oh, okay. So we would just say
1.5, yeah, right.
Oh, I don't want this in here.
Yeah.
I guess we could have figured that out, Wendy.
Yes. Yeah, I don't know what, it just conceptually, I kind of want to keep the rate, some kind of increase in the credit that would align with the increase in the actual rate to try to offset it.
Can I ask a question, Wendy?
Yeah, right. Sorry.
So the town gave guidance on the creation of this rate a long time ago. They wanted to create a rate assistance program. What was that guidance? Was there a 50% subsidy is what's rattling around my head, but I don't know where that came from. Is that what the guidance was that the town wanted to see as a support level?
I'd have to pull out the history on that, Brian, but what I recall was they wanted it heavily subsidized and it was a percentage, and I don't remember what the percentage was, but I believe they left it to the light board, their discretion to figure out what the subsidy was, but it was to heavily subsidize it, and it is.
It is. I remember years ago there was a review, and Concord Light had the most generous rate assistance subsidy, but that was due to that philosophy of the town. So I agree with Wendy. I think it should go with rates, but I think next year when we talk about rate philosophies, I think we should dig that history up to understand the wishes that created this and create, a structure that continues to meet it.
I agree. We'll put that on the list of, we definitely have that history, Brian, because I know I wrote it down the last time we looked at it, and Gordon was pretty advocate of trying to understand it as well at the time. So, so are there comments from the board in terms of what might be reasonable? Do we want to match what the 62.8% was? Laura, can you put that other schedule up for a sec? That spreadsheet.
Yep. Wendy, what you're proposing is changing the level of support from 10 cents to 10.05 cents to be in line with rates.
Yep.
I have a question.
I think Brian misspoke. I don't think he means 10.05. I think he means 10.5 cents. Just to
that's what
be clear for the record.
Yeah, thanks. Pam?
I did quick question. What are the administrative costs associated with making this marginal change? The question goes to, is somehow it more expensive to make? How expensive is the change itself administratively? I would imagine it's not costly in terms of educating the payers or administering it, right? I mean, it's
for us to do it internally. It's just part of management staff time. So you're doing one thing or another. So it's not really costing us anything. It's are we following through with the philosophy of the rate as it was established? And so that's what we're really looking for.
And also those on this rider still pay the high meter fee. When this was established, that meter fee was quite low. And I believe it was a 50% subsidy in the per kilowatt hour rate. So seeing a 60% or 62% makes sense in the sense that we're raising meter fees at the same time.
Right. And that meter fee went up 5% also, right? So, yeah. Okay. All right, so we're not voting here a change in this rate. Can I just get a sense from the board? Are you in support of changing this rate assistance so that we might plan for a rate hearing in the future? Gordon?
Just a question, and Laura, forgive me if I missed it, but what would be the impact on our budget if we made this change?
I don't have the exact figures in front of me, Gordon, but I did run those numbers and they are extremely small.
Yeah.
As in like thousands of dollars, you know, it's a very small number.
Okay.
Wendy, do you want an actual vote on changing the rate, or
I
if I
don't,
could
I
make a
don't think we
motion?
can, I don't think we can do a vote because we need a rate hearing officially, but I would like the sentiment of the board, and it might help Dave in the budget planning process. So the Gordon's question about the budget, we get that in there. as
My
part of the-
sentiment, yeah, I would be in support of the change.
So would I.
I would too.
Okay, I would as well, of course. So Dave, I think you've got some direction, which is
Yeah.
helpful. Thank you all.
So Wendy,
and-
one question.
Yep.
We could, we have a special meeting for the budget, December 29th. We
Yep.
could put an item on that, and normally the budget presentation is about an hour. So we could do a hearing there if the board would like to do that, and then it would be in line with the rate changes.
That's going to be my question to the board. But Dave, my question to you is, would we want to extend the time for that meeting? I don't think this is a extensive topic, but do you want to do that as well? Like make it an hour and a half, just in case?
That's what we'd have to do, yeah.
Okay, makes sense. The board comfortable with that? Our meeting on December 29th would be extended. Okay, not hearing objection. So let's plan on a rate hearing for December 29th, and we'll vote on it then. Thank you. Okay. Excellent. Great. So we are moving right along, and we are right up, well, a little ahead of schedule. So now we want to move on to the next agenda item, which is an update on the advanced metering infrastructure. And Dave, I know we haven't had an update on this because we deferred topics from November. So I'll let you proceed with the latest update. If it's you or Laura or others.
Yep. So Carol's actually going to give the update on this. So Carol, why don't you take it away?
All right, thank you, Dave. Good morning, everyone. We continue to be on schedule with the AMS project milestones. Lemmerhurt Consulting has been working on finalizing the benefits quantification analysis, which they've been working on a bit, and this will be assigning dollar values to some of the different benefits that we've discussed and identified as important to us. Their final benefits quantification report is due at the end of this month, at the end of December. We advertised the invitation to bid for the RFP during Thanksgiving week and published the RFP on Monday, the 29th. Proposals are due back on January 25th, 2022. And the evaluation team will be working on reading through and evaluating all of those proposals that we receive during the month of February. Yesterday, we held the Informational Teleconference for any vendors who are interested to learn more about the requirements for submitting the proposal, the whole process, and then to pose any questions about the AMS project in general. We had about roughly 37 people attend the call. As near as I can tell, I think it represented maybe 12 to 14 different meter vendors. It was hard to tell because some people called in on cell phones that didn't identify where they were calling from. And it seemed to represent electric meter vendors, water meter vendors, software people, and other hardware component vendors. There were no questions asked during the teleconference, which was interesting. The whole teleconference, I think, lasted maybe about 15 minutes, so it was pretty brief. The next milestone would be for any interested vendors to submit their NDAs back to us as of tomorrow. And then we'll release our asset data to them on Monday, the 13th. And that's pretty much all I have for updates. Looking out into the future after the evaluation team reviews proposals and comes up with their recommendation, we're looking at sometime in March to notify the short list of vendors and have them make presentations, and then also do our reference checks and do any other follow-up that we need to vet the winning vendor. And then I'll notify the finalist in the month of March, potentially, and then begin contract negotiations, hopefully in April. So that's what I have for an update.
Can I just ask a dumb sort of logistic question? So you're narrowing down your vendor. Do you actually notify all the vendors? Or do you hold one in the rears in case negotiations of the first preferred vendor fall through?
Yeah, Dave, if you could speak to that.
Sure. Yeah, so, we rank all the vendors and, you have the short list. Usually it's a short list of 3. Have them come in with proposals, and then the results of that get added to the rankings, and you narrow it down to 1. You generally keep the second one on board until you're successful with an execution of a contract.
I thought so. I was just checking when we said we notified vendors. I know word gets out quick, but okay, great. So it sounds like, the first, a key milestone is tomorrow when people have to submit their NDA to get more data. So that really gives you an indication of who's really serious and potential will bid, right?
That's correct.
Yeah. It would be helpful to hear sort of what you get for requests tomorrow. So we'll look forward to that update.
Yeah, actually, we've received, I think, looks like maybe about 7 NDAs already. So it'll be interesting to see if we get any more between today and tomorrow.
Oh, that's great. Did you expect that many, or are they all sort of electric, same kind of mix of people who participated? So water, electric.
It was a mix mostly of water and electric meters. There was one like more equipment vendor on there, but it was mostly the metering vendors, one software vendor.
Interesting.
That's good response. That's great. Excellent. Cool. Any questions from the board? Obviously a big important project. Okay.
So just a reminder to the board, Brian's going to be part of that review team. So Brian, you're going to have a little work coming up.
Moving along. Yeah.
Looking forward to it.
Attitude. That's good. Okay, so I will move on in our agenda. Thank you, Carol. Appreciate the update. Very helpful. Fingers crossed. And so I think, Carol, I don't know if you're back up. We're going to be talking about collections and past due accounts.
She may help me. We'll see.
Okay.
Just so make sure the board is aware, we're in the winter moratorium now. It happened back in the middle of November. Carol's team put together, some data around where we are with collections. Just going to go through some of them, and in 2021, we currently have 38 liens out there, and that's across water, sewer, electric. And I'm just going to put numbers with them so you guys see that. So on the electric side, 19,000, water, 7,000, sewer, 1,000, a little less than 1,000. It's a total of 26,000. Perspective, 2020, we did 155 liens. 41,000 on the electric side, 44,000 on the water side, 26,000 on the sewer side, so a total of 211,000. You can see the difference from last year to this year. And just to kind of normalize it, so in 2019, we had 71 liens, 37,000 on the electric side, 20,000 on the water side, 8,000 on the sewer side, totaling 65,000. So, looking at that, they've done a fabulous job. You probably recall that we suspended the collections process in the pandemic, and we came up with a really strategic way to get people to get caught up on their bills. And when we started looking at this, if you asked me if I thought we'd be as low as we are, I would not a chance. But Carolyn did a great job. Put it into kind of dollars. So the total past due electric is about 360,000. On the telecom side, we're about a little over 4,000 past due. So, in terms of where we are, we're about 517,000 past due. So we've certainly, had a really, really good collections process this year. And, we have it all broken down, and I can send the report to the board if they're interested in seeing it. But we have it broken down between electric, water, sewer, and broadband. Obviously, electric's the highest that has, current balances and whatnot. And that's normal. That's the way it is every year, right? Because that's the most expensive service. So, like, for example, the total past due between the four is 517,000. But if you put it into perspective, 377,000 of that is current bills, right? So the number isn't nearly as bad as it sounds right out of the gate when you look at it. So I think all in all, just want to thank Carol and her team for an exceptional job in a really difficult time. So, Carol, do you have anything to add? Did I miss anything?
Nope, I have nothing to add, and you covered everything that I was hoping for.
All right.
Well, thank you. I mean, your team's done a fantastic job. I remember we last updated in June?
June, yeah.
That's when you were starting to turn things on, and you had quite a large inventory of outreach to do. And so congratulations to you and your team. It's really a fantastic job, and good for our citizenry that we were actually able to put good plans in place. So thank you. Sounds like a
Thank you.
approach. So great. Pam?
Just a quick question, theoretical only. What happens if ultimately you have somebody who does not pay, period? What is the recourse, turning off the service, or do you have a humane sort of, you're going to take care of everybody anyway? I'm just curious, what happens if theoretically someone just doesn't pay?
So when we're in the winter moratorium, we can't shut off residential customers. And so that would wait until April 15th. And we would go through our collections process with them. We have a bunch of usual suspects that don't pay in the winter. They know the process, and they start when we get out of the moratorium. If we're out of the moratorium, April 15th to November 15th, we have an internal process that they get notifications that they're past due, and then they get another notification, so on and so forth. And then they finally get shut off if they don't pay. And we've done shutoffs this year. I don't have the exact number in front of me, but those are always difficult staff because some of the customers can get irate, and we've had police escorts doing them from time. So we don't like to do them, but it is part of the process, and people do end up paying.
I just wonder, as a matter of public policy, whether we want to look at that. I don't know. I mean, I'm just thinking, is there possibly a scenario where it is not good public policy to even consider turning off somebody's basic services?
It's basic utility practice. It happens on the operational side. So, that's not going to change. It's every utility has the same process.
I'm just wondering if it's the right process, if there's a public policy issue embedded in it, that's all. And if there isn't, that's fine. But if there is, I think it's an interesting question whether if we had the ability to consider this, we want to consider the question whether there should not be the ability to turn off certain services, period, depending on the profile of the person who's not paying.
There are,
Just-
there are areas where we can't shut off. That's established at the state level. We follow that, but in terms of shutting off for non-payment, that is standard utility practice, and it's a process that does provide people to pay their bills. So I understand where you're coming from. But it's not going to change anytime soon.
And Dave, we're consistent across all our utilities. That's important too, right? So the light plant wouldn't do anything independent of the other utilities.
No,
I see your hand raised, Alice.
Thanks. First of all, Carol, thank you for all the work. I know how hard it is to make those phone calls, to work out payment plans, and it's noble work, and I really appreciate that. I'm curious about two things. The first is, of those that are delinquent in paying, how many of those are already on a rate assistance rider? Are we talking about, because as we talk about the rate assistance rider, I'd like to understand the context in which we're making the decisions on the policies behind what level of assistance we provide.
so we generally have around 163 customers on the residential assistance rider. And that goes up and down from time to time, but it's in that ballpark.
And so those are the ones that are more likely to be delinquent in their paying. Is that what I'm understanding?
Not necessarily.
Not
No.
necessarily.
You'd be surprised at some of the people that are on collections process. We're not talking small bills, we're talking large bills. It's eye-opening.
Interesting.
Although we do have a couple of customers who are on assistance that have been on assistance for a number of years and haven't actually made a payment. We've got one customer, I think, that goes back to 2016 that's been on assistance and hasn't made a payment since then. Another customer, I think it's been since 2018, they haven't made a payment. And in one case, the customer is the property owner. So we ended up assessing a lien on their property to collect the balance that way.
Well, I think that these are questions as we move into the 2022 cycle of our rate reviews. These are the policy questions that I think we'll want to address. Are we at the right levels for what we need? And are we helping the people that we think that need the most help, particularly in this residential rate rider? So anyway, thank you. That's all I needed.
Questions. The good news is there isn't as much outstanding, which is amazing. So again, kudos to Carol, you and your team. Fantastic work. Okay, so moving on in our agenda. So we're moving
Wendy?
on now. Yep. sorry.
Gordon has his hand up.
Yeah, thank you. I just also point out that there is the Hugh Cargill Trust that all of us can donate to, and that plays in there. I think that aid delivered through that is qualified. But anyway, I'm just going to say that there are other options too, the other assistance that we're offering.
Yeah, and we fund the electric side of the Hugh Cargill.
I'm sure, Carol, in your discussions with people looking for assistance, we make efforts to educate people on where there is some funding opportunities. Although I think the Hugh Cargill Trust is always looking for more funds, right? There's not a lot these days. So
Yeah,
I think there's a current solicitation right now for raising funds for the Hugh Cargill.
yeah, it's about this time of year where they send us a request funding. We look at it and we fund it, and they administer the funds. So the process has worked quite well for a long time now.
great. Okay, well, let me try again. I think we're ready to move on to our next agenda item on the EV rates for the business customers.
Yep.
Dave, you gonna kick that off?
Laura, do you want to kick this one off?
Okay.
Sure. I would like to share my screen again, if that's okay. Is that okay, Dave?
Yep, go ahead.
Okay. What do you see?
Your presentation.
Okay. Okay, so. And this should have been included in your packet, so, you know, I just thought if there aren't too many slides, I just thought I'd go over them as context might be helpful. So Jan's team and I have been working on trying to find a way to incentivize workplace charging. As you know, we've had incentives for home charging for a number of years now. And home charging is much easier to deal with because you can incentivize people for the most part to charge at night. But with workplace charging, there is an obvious potential misalignment because they could potentially be charging during the peak. And as we've discussed as a background context, electric vehicles are not necessarily good for the light plant or even for society for that matter. I mean, if people charge whenever they want and people are charging during the peak, we'd have to build a lot more power generation and transmission, right, to address this much larger electricity supply need. So it's really important that we get people who are charging vehicles to charge those vehicles off peak, not during the peak. So the goals of this program in particular is to increase the uptake of EVs for workers, multi-dwelling unit residents, schools, fleets, and retail, as opposed to individual residential customers. And furthermore, and very importantly, to reduce and align the peak-related costs caused by EV charging. So the way the program would work, a commercial customer would install a new EV charging station on a separate meter. I know we want to get away from adding separate meters, but as we explain how the program works, this is the only way we can figure out how to do this. All the usage would be billed at a new tariff rate, which we're going to review. CMLP would have to approve the customer's charging usage policy and pricing. The customer would also have to provide their charging data to us so we can begin to get a sense of when workplace charging actually does occur. And if the customer meets all those criteria, then they would be eligible to receive both up to $3,000 per charging station for the cost of the equipment, and up to 50% of out-of-pocket expenses for qualified installation costs up to a maximum of $3,000 per dual port station. These dollar figures were chosen so that a customer who applies for the Massachusetts EVIP grant program would experience almost zero cost if they combined, if they applied for both the Mass EVIP and the CMLP rebate. There will still be customer costs that would not be eligible for either the Mass EVIP or the CMLP rebate, such as software and warranty subscriptions with the EV charging station provider, maintenance, permitting, signage, painting, and bollards. So the customer would still have skin in the game. This would not be a $0 cost for them, but it would defray a large chunk of the out-of-pocket costs for installing one of these charging stations. So the benefits that we see of this program is that we would be furthering the town's sustainability goals of electrification. Electric sales would potentially increase for the benefit of all CMLP customers. This is part of that virtuous cycle that Gordon was talking about. It would even out the peak demand cost risk between CMLP and the customer, which I'm going to describe further in a minute. And then we would also be able to collect the data on how these customers do charge, which will help us target and design the program better in the future. So right now, CMLP electric vehicle charging would cost very different amounts depending on whether the customer is classified as a small general service, medium, or large. Small general service are those commercial customers whose demand, which is the highest monthly usage, the highest peak hour usage during the month, is less than 20 kilowatts. Medium is those whose demand is greater than 20 but less than 200. And then large is everyone else whose demand is larger than 200 kilowatts. Small general service customers pay no demand fee. There's nothing in this box here. Medium pay under current tariffs pays $12.40 per kW, and large pays $10.90. What this means is that a small general service customer added electric vehicle load, and they weren't restricted in the hours that they could charge, they would not pay any of the peak costs, but CMLP would experience the peak costs, which means the cost would have to be subsidized by other customers. In contrast, a medium general service customer who added electric vehicle load, if they, not if they part charge during the peak, if the charging of the car added to their monthly peak, they would be charged $12.40 per kilowatt. An average vehicle charging at level 2 charges at 6.6 kilowatts. So one car during the month would be assessed an $82 charge to charge that vehicle that one time, which is very expensive. So you've got small general service customers paying nothing, which means everybody else pays. And you've got medium and large paying this huge rate, which could make electric vehicle charging cost prohibitive. So what we're
Sorry to interrupt, Laura. Can you explain coincident versus non-coincident? And because you're saying their demand and you're saying we're covering the cost. Those are two different things because of the coincident, non-coincident peak for the expenses.
Yeah, so if a small general service customer adds electric vehicle load and those vehicles charge during the coincident peak, which is the peak that CMLP as a system, not CMLP, it's the peak for the entire grid. Okay, the one
when the expense is calculated, when the cost of CMLP is calculated, that's the peak you're referring to.
So if this car charged during that, CMLP would have to pay these peak related costs, which are, you know, close to $15 or $16 per kW right now. Okay, and the small general service customer wouldn't pay anything. Is that good, Brian?
Yeah, I just would add that the general service customers 2 and 3 that pay that demand charge is not the same time as the fee you just explained, and that is dependent on the building's load, peak load over the month, not the time at which the expense is calculated for the load plan.
Yep. Good job explaining that, Brian.
Laura, net, the cost for those medium and large, right now, the cost for a vehicle is still $82, regardless of expensive, right?
Say that again, Wendy, sorry.
Still, your point is that under the current structure, the medium and large general customers would pay $82 per car.
Yes.
Right, I mean, that's your point, it's expensive.
That's exactly right. So what we're proposing with the new program is a new rate, okay, called the Business EV Rate Plan. I've called it BURP, but I've been told that needs to be changed. So we may be changing that. But what we would be proposing to do is add a modest demand fee. So instead of the $10 to $12, it would be $1.83, which would work out to be about $12 per car per month. And that instead of paying a flat rate for any time of day, we would institute the time of use rate, the summer time of use rate that Baker Tilly prepared for CMLP, which is roughly 13 cents off peak, less than 19 cents mid peak, and 33 cents peak. So for these customers, the benefit is clear because even though they're going to pay a slightly higher rate than they would under their existing rate schedule if they charge during the day, they won't incur this huge, demand fee if the vehicle ends up adding to the customer's monthly peak. And even for small general service customers, the good news is that if they have enough vehicles, right, and they do get over the 20 kilowatts, they would not experience these very high demand fees. So just to remind you about the times of day that we're talking about, these different rates, that mid-peak would be either 8 a.m. to 4 p.m. or 8 p.m. to midnight. The peak would be 4 to 8 p.m. and then the off-peak would be midnight to 8 a.m. And all day on the weekends. So that is
Laura, can I ask a question? So that cost that you have under the new rate of $12, it's going to vary it still varies based on when the car is actually charged, right? So is $12 the expected mid-peak cost?
You're talking about this $12.40?
Yeah.
Wendy?
Yeah. No. Actually, the next one. So under the new rate, the average cost per. So
this.
Yeah, that's what I was looking at.
Yep.
Okay. So that's just the demand. Okay. So that average sort of $82 per car charge, what is the equivalent under the new business rate? It would vary based on peak, right?
So if the electric vehicle charging under this new rate plan was charging during the hour in which the customer experienced their highest monthly demand, then they would be assessed the $1.83 fee, which for our average car would be $12. If the car, let's say this customer peaks, between 11 p.m. and 12 p.m., right, and no cars charged during that time, well, the cars are only going to pay, CMLP is only going to charge the customer these variable rates. They wouldn't incur this $1.83. They only incur it if the car ends up charging during the customer's monthly peak. Is that your question?
No, I get it now. You stated, I was sort of, how does the business customer, the concept of what's the average cost per car charging is a good metric for a business owner to understand. Sometimes it's hard to manage all the volumetric numbers, but
Yeah.
I understand. Yeah.
That was a helpful clarification, Laura. I assumed that the burp rate would have a $12 or $24 charge every month. But if it's coincident to the load of the building, then they can't avoid that fee. The customer doesn't have a lot of insight into when they peak. So it's not something they really can't control, but they can luckily avoid it, I guess, at certain times.
Well, the other thing is if they do incur it, Brian, it's a very modest charge. It's $12
Correct.
for the car. And since they're only paying $1.40 a gallon equivalent in gasoline, right, this $12 per month, think about how much what you pay in gasoline, per month, it's not going to make electric vehicle charging, cost prohibitive.
Yeah, great.
Can you clarify one other point? I think Brian said it. When we talk about peak, we're not a customer's monthly peak. That sounds to me a little different than looking at the peak hours which there are graduated rates for peak hours. I don't quite understand that because it would seem to me that it would be advisable rather than have a very complicated rate structure to say you can't charge during peak hours. So at 4 o'clock, 4 to 8, we only in extended circumstances would allow charging during our peak hours. But that's not what you're saying. You're saying something else about the customer's average peak. And I'm not quite understanding the difference between peak demand hours and a customer's average peak demand.
Okay. So in answer to the first point you made, Alice, to date, we've kind of taken an approach that rather than controlling customers' load, we are going to try to incentivize. Like, we're not going to tell them they can or can't charge during certain periods, but we're going to attempt to modify their charging behavior based on economic incentives. So what I would explain is that these demand fees, this $10.90 and $12.40 are currently assessed to large commercial, medium commercial customers based on their non-coincident peak. And I think Dave will tell you that's pretty standard. It's always been that way. We don't even have the ability right now to bill based on a coincident peak. So the coincident peak, one way to think about this is the coincident peak is the hour during which CMLP is assessed our big wholesale charges, like for transmission and capacity. And that's generally happening when the entire grid is peaking. But these rates that we have for commercial customers don't bill the $10.90 and $12.40 based on that hour. Instead, the meter records during the month what was the maximum kilowatts that CMLP delivered to that customer whenever it occurred. Just what was their maximum. And that is what gets used to multiply by this fee to come up with their monthly bill. So with the burp rate, we don't currently have, the ability to charge based on a coincident peak because the meters don't track, right, what time of day it is necessarily. We think we will have that ability with NISC moving forward when we get the new meters. So what we're proposing right now is to keep the same methodology that is currently utilized to assess a customer's bill, but drastically reduce the fee in the event that the car charges during the customer's monthly peak, the hour during which they use the most, irrespective of when that occurs. Does that help?
I think I get that. Thank you.
That is a great little explanation. And I hope we get more of that over the next year as we talk about rates.
Maybe I'll try to do some diagrams or pictures or something.
Yeah. Just a quick input. I had sent you an email with some questions last month about the rate, but I think this is a wonderful effort done by Dave and the light plant. And this is filling a gap, empowering our business customers, and is well designed. And it leverages the state's EBIP program and other factors to help our businesses. This is the light plant supporting the community in a balanced way. I think it's great.
I agree wholeheartedly, Brian. I do see a couple of hands raised. Alice, you had your hand raised and then you dropped. I don't know. Did you have a question?
No, mine was answered. Thank you.
Okay, Gordon, I can't see you. I don't know if you have a question on this.
I do. Thank you, Wendy. I guess my question to you, Laura, is the $1.83 demand charge, that would be implemented using a special meter, right? A meter that's only looking at the usage from the EVs. Is that right?
Yeah, and this is why we felt it was necessary to create a new rate and to require a new meter. You may recall that one of the board's goals and the light plant's goals is to not have all these disparate meters, but rather to consolidate. But with the current technology we have, we just don't have that ability. And so to create this type of incentive and program, we do need to require the customer to install a separate meter.
Thank you.
So Mark Howell, I see your hand raised.
Yeah, thank you, Wendy. I just had a brief implementation question and Gordon almost got to it. But is this new meter actually a sub meter, or is it a meter in parallel with the customer's existing meter? Because I'm wondering if it's the latter, how one would understand whether that peak load, contributed by the charger was coincident with the peak demand of the customer's actual primary service, if you will. That was sort of my first question. And my second question really is this also implying that the small general service customer who maybe doesn't have any knowledge and never had any experience with demand charges is now going to need to be educated about what demand charges are? Thank you very much. I do, by the way, in general, I think this is a good idea. I'm just seeking some clarification.
So it's not a sub-meter, it's a meter in parallel, right? So it's its own piece. If it were a sub-meter, you'd have to figure out a way to net out the demands, and that's what we're trying to avoid. So that's really the answer to that, Mark.
Could that, the meter in parallel versus the meter sub-metered, is that going to increase installation costs and wiring from the business owner?
There'd be installation costs either way. So, it's hard to say if it's going to increase or decrease depending on the customer and what they have set up.
So based on Mark's question, I actually think that I misspoke earlier, and I want to clarify. If it is its own meter, the car, as you originally suspected, Brian, there would be a demand fee that would be paid, whether it would be based on one car, two cars, or what would be dependent on when they charge. But if you're on your own meter, you're going to establish your own max. And if there are only EVs on the meter, then one of them is going to establish the maximum.
Right. So customers will see a $12 or $24 demand charge every month on this rate.
Yeah. So I'm sorry, Mark, thank you for bringing that point up, because I was thinking of it in conjunction with the existing meter, but on its own meter, it is going to have a demand fee. Sorry about that.
All right. So Laura, as we contemplate this new rate, this obviously needs a vote by the board and would become a new rate structure. What is your timing in terms of thinking about this rollout? I don't know if that's a question for Dave or Laura.
So, the first and foremost, it would need a rate hearing because it is a new rate.
Right.
And, we wanted to present this today to, again, see what the board's interest in it is. And, then we could move forward if there's interest to have a rate hearing on it and implement it. Ideally, it would have been great if we could have had it implemented at January 1, but we understand that that's, not feasible because we didn't get to it last meeting, and that's okay. But I think it would be nice to get this out there in the first quarter of 22.
I just want to clarify that, and I think to Brian's point, there's education around it, right? So that's all part of the planning and implementation. So, I heard a lot of positive feedback. I certainly would be in support of pursuing this new rate as it was designed, and I actually do think it's great that we are leveraging the state program as well. I think that's going to be a big win. Are there additional votes, comments from the board in terms of support, Gordon?
I thank you for a well thought out program, Laura. I guess my one question would be, are there some downside risks? And I'm inclined to sort of give it a try, but as long as we can make sure that the program doesn't become misaligned with our business objectives generally, like if the coincident costs, demand charges, whatever. Going into this, we knew that there were risks, and you designed this program to try and minimize those. But is there a way to make sure that the program is actually working the way that we intended to? And if not, to actually pull the plug later?
Good point. I think like any new program, you want to keep it assessed, manage the assess it, right? So, Mark, Howell?
I guess just one brief follow-up. I think it could be really easy to get too hung up on the demand fee. And we need to remind ourselves that if you put in these chargers, they can be used many times a month, and that peak is only established once. And Brian correctly pointed out that the peak is going to be, if it's a 2-port charger, it's going to be the worst case scenario is 2 cars charging at the same time, establishing $124 peak. But let's say that charger is used, 20 or 30 times a month, that demand charge spread out over all those charging incidents adds $1 per charge or something like that. So again, I think it's a matter of education and people understanding about. So I like the idea behind it, and I'd encourage further development. Thank you.
Any additional thoughts from the board? No. Okay. Good discussion. I'm hearing general sentiment for pursuing this. So, Dave, I don't know if we want to consider this is part of our rate hearing that we've already discussed for December, or if you want to defer to January.
Let me talk with Laura and Carol, and I'll get back to you on that.
Okay. All right. Sounds good. All right. Well, we are still staying on track for our agenda. I do want to make sure that we have time for our next topic. So with that, Dave, we'll move on to an update on the middle school solar update.
Yep. Have I shared with the board the schematic design?
No.
No.
Let me show you that.
Okay.
I'm gonna find it, but just give me a second. Okay. All right, you can see this?
Not yet. Yes, I can. I don't know. Can others see? I can't. Oh, here it is. Yep, came up.
Okay. Yeah, so we had Solar Design Associates do the preliminary design of what could go on the new school. And the guidance we gave them at the time was to maximize what could be put on the roof and canopies as well. So you can see here's the rooftop, and then here's the canopies. And so it's a good preliminary rollout. You'll see that it's a total of 1.2 megawatts DC. And then it's about 50-50 from the roof to the canopies. You can see there's about 635 kW on the roof. So, there's scrolling slowly, but there's quite a bit of detail in here. They also, well, you don't need to see that. That's all the detail. But essentially, this was the first step in the process for us. And, will the numbers work out to exactly what they've forecasted? No, it wouldn't. It would definitely, vary based on the final design and the layout. So I think at this point, we are very happy with the size of it. We're also looking at storage, and in the design, it's all supposed to be solar and storage ready. We're hearing from many people that this is something they want when the school's open. They want that there. There are a few pieces on our end that we have to discuss, and the board will need to discuss. And it comes around, for the rooftop. We put the rooftop up. The light plant's paying for it out of light plant funds, and it goes into the school. And how do we meter that? And what type of agreement do we come up with the school, right? Because we can't give free power. That's something that we can't do. So those are some pieces we have to figure out. And the next step to the process as well is figuring out the financial model. So the idea all along was to get the financial model done once we know there's approval to build the school. And that would come back to the board in terms of do we want to, or do we need to go to town meeting for a borrowing to pay for the solar installation? And so that's something that will be coming up as we move forward. You know, and we are committed to owning and operating the array. And likewise, we have to look at the battery storage piece as well. So we're in the early phases here, but there's quite a bit of work coming up. And I think, you know, that's kind of where we are with the project at this point. I don't know if you have questions or not. I'm sure you do.
Well, I think just Dave, I know we're gonna have more discussion about it. This gets to my earlier comment about aligning this with the school project. People will want it installed and ready when the school is gonna go live. So if we assume that the school is approved in the February meeting, January, sorry, then we need to be prepared from a funding perspective to sort of move forward, even without understanding all the details right now, because on February 2nd, the warrant is finalized for the May town meeting. So I think maybe it's really January, we're going to need to be positioned to have sort of a placeholder warrant article, I believe, as a board. And we need a lot more discussion about this, but I think we need to be planning along those lines. So with that, let me just, I know people have their hands raised. Gordon, not Gordon, sorry, Brian.
Yeah, I wanted to thank Dave and his staff for staying on pace with this building project. A lot of people want to turn around quickly, but we can't get ahead of it because the construction leads a lot of the decisions we make. I think it's great that we're going to talk as a board about this and how we would like to have it structured from a billing standpoint, from a financing standpoint. You had said, Dave, that you wanted to own the array. I didn't know if you wanted to consider the same model that was used at the landfill and WR Grace, where there's a PPA. But we can talk about that at future meetings, but that might be a way to avoid the capital investment and the need to go to town meeting for borrowing.
Yeah, we could look at that model, Brian, you're right. We hadn't gone down that path yet because we wanted to see if it makes financial sense to own it and operate it internally, because then, it is another clean source located in town. Right now, the PPAs on the Grace and landfill are with a third party, and they control the solar renewable energy credit. So that was the downside to that process for us.
I'm excited about the project.
Alice, I see your hand raised.
Yeah, thank you. So I understand that there are a lot of complicated decisions that will have to be made, not just about the design of the project, as you saw from the Solar Design Associates schematic, but there are whole funding mechanisms. And I'm hoping that we can have for this board a timeline of milestones that we need to be deciding on so that we can plan how we're going to get to a town meeting vote if that's what we need to do for funding by the February date or the May date when town meeting was happening in the spring. There are a lot of things we have to cover. And I would love to see that laid out in a timeline that will help us guide our decision-making process along for the next several months as we need to make those investments in our understanding of the solar project on the school. So I really appreciate that this is being brought up now. And I assume that for the financial models, as we talked earlier, that we'll need to hire a consultant to review the options for us. Is that right? Is that still your thinking, Dave?
Yeah, we can run the numbers internally, and we also, we'll have Solar Design Associates give us some that's what they can give us a pretty good accurate cost. And then in terms of what the total cost is, we can run that through a model and figure out, borrowing and payback and all of that. We'll do that piece internally.
Okay, great. Well, I'm excited to see this project move forward. Love to see it on the agenda each month so that we can keep track of it and to see what our milestone steps are along the way. So thank you.
Yeah, and then I just Googled it. It looks to me like as if the 2021 solar tax credit for businesses, I think it's called a investment tax credit, or IIC, ITC is, it's like in 2022, 26%. So if we owned it ourselves, we wouldn't really be able to benefit as a town from a federal tax credit. So I know that you're aware of that, but it's something that belongs in the conversation and say, hey, look, we know about this. We're going to do that, this, the other thing. Thank you.
Yeah, and that'll all be part of the, presentation, the financial piece when we get there.
Matt Johnson, I see your hand raised.
Yeah, so I just coming in with a little bit of perspective from the building committee. So it would not surprise me if the part that's related to the solar installation doesn't even get finalized this year. The project's not going to be completed until 2025. So, when can you actually commence? You're not going to have this capacity going online for a few years. And it may be possible to phase the construction, and the funding of this after the funding of the school project. But that said, I think that a lot of people think of the solar array as being part of the overall scope of the middle school. And so while we're at the special town meeting and we're borrowing strictly for the construction of the building, I think people are thinking in terms holistically about, hey, there's a whole package here that includes having a solar installation on the site. And so I just wanted to say, even though maybe details haven't yet been fully worked out, that to have the light board or the light plant, validate that, yes, we're pursuing this, we're seriously, planning it, and, that it is our intent to build this as part of the overall structure of the bill, the project in the longer term. I think that would be key to be representative at the special town meeting in case that point comes up, and I do expect that it will. Just those points. Again, I wouldn't be surprised if you didn't need to bring something in for 2022 town meeting. It might be 2023, it might be 2024 even. I'm not sure. I'm not an expert in that, but.
I think, thanks, Matt. I appreciate that. I think clearly, even on the December 16th public hearing, someone might raise a question. So we need to be aware of where our commitment is right now and be able to speak to it.
Thanks for pointing that out. That's actually probably the forum in which there's the most free-flowing discussion.
Right. Gordon?
And then briefly, that same resource indicates a 26% tax credit in 2022, 22% and 10%. So there's a time urgency there if we're going to pursue that. A 2025 project or implementation wouldn't even perhaps have any ITC at all, in which case go ahead and own it.
But maybe you should just lay out the panels on the big pile of dirt that we're going to put up there.
Yeah.
Okay, let me just see, is there more comments from the board, questions? Okay, Alice.
So I know that this evening there is a panel discussion about the solar project at the middle school. I got an email this morning that lists a Zoom link for that meeting. So the panel discussion will have, I don't know if Dave, are you on this panel? I know that somebody from the CAB, the school building committee, is presenting. I don't know who else, but it's tonight at, I believe, 7 o'clock for anyone who wants more information about the solar project at the school.
Thank you, Alice. I think that's an important, very timely meeting, so I appreciate that. Okay. Let me just look for other hands raised. I think Pamela Dritt, I see your hand raised. And I'll just comment, we're almost at time, so I'm going to ask everyone to keep it brief, but thanks, Pamela.
Is this the time, Pamela Dritt, 13 Concord Green, is this the time for asking questions like David was waiting for, or should I wait?
Well, let me just ask a question. Do you have a question on the solar?
Yeah. do we have a plan as the light plant to strategically build up funds for the capital expenses of broadband and solar rollout like this project, plus electric school buses? Because building our own local peaker plant might be a really good idea. And as soon as you've got a bunch of homeowners with and businesses with residential, with solar roofs and battery backups, we can use them to feed energy into the grid at peak times if we need them to. Paying them to do that cheaper than, you know, the peak that we get. And we can also use the electric vehicle fleet as a mobile battery backup for the entire town, depending on how we do that. But particularly, we have control of the school buses. And as soon as our school bus fleet is electric, if we could use them, for example, to take over at the recent blackout at Emerson, where their generator failed. Well, plug in the school bus. It's not being used at that point. I think we need to make sure that we have funds to use for things like the middle school electrical, plus the battery, the industrial storage, so that we end up not having to buy much power from outside the town. Right now, we can't net meter, right? The town of Concord, the light plant, we don't do net metering for solar customers. Is that true?
We do.
We have net metering for solar customers. We've had it for years.
Okay. Okay, so do you, so if we can incentivize solar customers by paying them as soon as we get time of use rates, right?
We have a time of use rate in place now. As long as members have, as long as citizens have a separate meter, they'd have to choose to install that. And I'm just, not to cut you off, Pam, but I think you've raised some very large strategic questions, not all of which I can say we have plans for, but you're consistently pushing us for those long-term plans. So we will consider those comments. And I think what you're hearing today is that we're looking at optimizing solar on the school and leveraging new technology with battery storage to optimize our current known resources and benefits of the technology. So
because
as we go forward,
I want to concentrate your attention on the benefits of owning a fleet of electric school buses that Concord Light can use.
all right, well, I understand that, and we'll have to collaborate on optimizing the EV for the buses first. And as part of that strategy, we'll figure out how best to leverage that.
We could make a lot of money off that.
Yeah. So Pamela, that's happening at the speed of which financing can allow for the bus fleet. And the Concord now has 2 electric school buses. I don't know if we've announced that the second one has been delivered. And they're purchased, they put in an order for a third, as well as the vehicle to grid infrastructure that was passed in a previous town meeting is getting implemented. That process has started.
But the thing is, we bought 2 diesel buses.
Well, that we have, the schools have to meet their obligation for operations, and
You're responsible for us. We should not buy any more diesel buses ever.
So I would
for our kids, it costs us money. We need to do the investment in electric buses instead.
Yeah, let's take this. I would love to sit down, and I'm actually writing a paper. I can send it to you. I'll email my paper to you to explain all of this in excruciating detail later.
And
Yeah.
I just want to jump in.
And thank you for your comments, Pam, because that is the sentiment and the direction long-term that we need to go.
Recognize it's 9:35. We are past our end date. I am not seeing other comments. You know, we've had a liaison comment already from the board. Are there other citizen comments? And I'll just ask if you have them. We're going to ask you to be very brief. And David Allen, you had your hand up earlier today, so I want to give you an opportunity.
I'm glad to be brief, but as we have said so many times before, we've sat here and listened for a couple of hours. You also need to be sure you have time for citizen comment. If it means more time, it means more time. Going back to the update on the task force at the beginning of this meeting. But before I get to the 2 points there, just to notice 2 nights ago, we had another outage over here, tree across the line and so forth. Once again, resolved well within an hour in the bloody middle of the night. I think Sunday, if I'm not mistaken. Just really impressive service. Just those things need to be said out loud. And got to tell you the appreciation over here. Thank you so much to the right plan. Now, the task force update at the beginning of that, in essence, was that we'd use gross margin to cover CapEx. And to expand on that, since I was very delighted. The argument was grow the subscribership and of course use the gross margin in that increased subscribership to provide the necessary investment funds, the capital expenditure to do whatever it is we're going to do. There's a question in there, just what is that gross margin by customer? And the reality is that in telecoms operations like this, ordinarily there's not nearly enough money in gross margin to do the rather large capital expenditures that are necessary. There's a second point here, but let me first of all inquire, do we have concrete numbers on that gross margin per subscriber? And has that been placed against what the likely investment is going to be so we can see whether or not that really is a viable possibility? Since ordinarily what you have to do is bond to get those funds. Let me start there, please, and I'll come on to the second one afterwards.
I could probably answer that question.
Super, I'm glad you're here. Glad you're here, Mark. Thank you.
The short answer is concrete, no, we're developing a sense of it. We are looking at the budgets for prior years and trying to establish it in rough terms. The gross margin, it seems to be running around 20%, but we're working on finalizing that. And just to plug for our meeting, we're typically meeting on Thursday evenings at 6:30 p.m. and those meetings are posted, and we'll be happy to get into those kinds of discussions with any members of the public that want to join with the task force during those sessions.
Item 2, once again, on the task force, and glad we got a couple of participants here. The task force clearly was put together for the purpose of expanding to those currently unserved areas. Gordon pointed out that because some power is Eversource, that's been a barrier. Very numerous other topics were covered, but the initiation of this task force was about getting full coverage across Concord, as you put it, in terms of equity. Let's not have haves and have-nots. What's happening on that front? Is that indeed a focus? What can we hope here very shortly? You're going to have a report for the select board and then for the future town meeting.
Wendy, can I?
Yeah, no, actually, I'm expecting you to, Mark. Thank you. Please
Okay,
respond.
great.
Yeah.
And
Sorry,
I
I
am
didn't
so
want to
appreciative you're here for it, Mark. You're the chair.
Yeah,
After all of it. Thank you.
absolutely. Yeah, as the chair of the task force, one clarification, we're targeting a report which contains recommendations on the topics that Gordon covered so nicely earlier in this meeting by the time of the next town meeting. So we're working, by consensus, more or less towards more of an April, May delivery of the final report. So I don't want people to come away with the impression that the schedule is that compressed. But having said that, we absolutely are focusing on the core question of, what are the economics and opportunities around completion of the fiber network, since that was really core to what Article 41 asked this task force to try to establish, which is what would it take to complete fiber builds throughout the town. We've been able to boil down that geographically. There are roughly sort of 50 contiguous areas around town that where for one reason or other the fiber build was not completed, and we're looking at whether or not there might be some ways to group those by kind of what the issue is there, and then establish some abilities to understand what the costs might be. That I think will also help us understand whether there's kind of a typical project size, because similar to what we've done in the past with undergrounding the electric system, we should understand that completing the fiber network could be a series of smaller projects that's funded over time with the right level of commitments in the annual budgets, rather than necessarily some very big construction project that needs a separate funding. But we're trying to understand what those potential opportunities would be, and that's part of the discussion.
Thank you.
Is that it? I think so.
I did have a separate comment under liaison comments, but whatever you want.
You want to add your comments now? Questions? Rather?
Yeah, this is on a completely separate, and I will be brief, but I am disappointed to see that the board's review of the 2022 budget isn't scheduled until December 29th. The late publication of budget documents doesn't allow adequate time for review of the budget, and the light board will be reviewing a budget that's proposed to go into effect just 2 days after that review. By contrast, the town manager's FY23 budget is due to the select board on January 28th, and that budget goes into effect on July 1st of 2022, some 5 months later. And I feel that the public process is not well served by the schedule that's used by CMLP, and the lateness does not contribute to higher accuracy. In fact, it does the opposite. The lack of time for study more likely results in omissions and errors that require correction once the budget is already in effect. So I'm urging the board to insist that in future years, the budget be prepared and presented at least 60 days prior to going into effect. And I'm confident that the board and staff can jointly agree to a more appropriate schedule by planning the fall meetings in advance. Thanks for taking the time to listen to my comment.
Mark, appreciate your comments, and we'll consider that going forward. We're sort of following our traditional budget process, but the good news, at least I think the track record in the last couple of years, we have been able to avoid any errors that we have traditionally seen by the late development. But and just a question, and if I might just interject before another comment. Dave, in terms of the budget presentation, can we just confirm that the budget materials will be provided in advance of the meeting? Usually it's before the holiday.
Yeah, they're scheduled to be ready for the 20th and distributed to the board. And then the meeting's on the 29th, I believe. So, and just to, the 29th meeting is to review the proposed forecast, which is exactly what we have. It's a forecasted budget, and then it would be voted on in January. So that's the timeline.
All right, I see additional questions. So Jerry Frankel, yeah.
Thanks, Wendy. Jerry Frankel, 132 Jenny Dugan Road, Chair of CSEC. I just briefly want to add a comment in support of Matt Johnson's earlier comments regarding the importance of having information available on CMLP's plans for the PV at the middle school. When special town meeting occurs and before, as he pointed out, I expect there will be lots of questions from the community about, what is CMLP's commitment to this? What will the financial impact be? Will that impact be part of the overall middle school bond offering, or will it be separate? I would just encourage CMLP to be prepared for this because I expect lots of questions to come up. Thank you.
Thank you. You have anticipated that. Okay, I am not seeing additional questions from the audience. Anything else from the board? No. Dave, I think we talked about this separately, but I think you and I will have to chat and we will put together some talking points in anticipation of the public hearing on this that we can probably share with the board in advance of that public hearing as well. So we'll plan to do that. Okay.
Great.
All right, so Gordon? You're on mute, Gordon.
Earlier, Dave, you offered to share some information. I would like to get that. It'll help me with the minutes. Thanks.
Yep. And Dave, actually that schematic on the school design might be beneficial for the board just to have, there were some other technical details there that I don't know if we need, but schematic.
Yeah, I'll get some stuff out this afternoon.
Great, thank you. Appreciate it. Okay, well, with that, I would entertain a motion to bring the meeting to a close.
I move that we bring this meeting to a close.
At
I second. I second.
Sam, second. All right, so we'll take a roll call. Gordon?
Yes.
Sam?
Yes.
Alice? I think that's a yes. You're mute, but.
Yes,
Okay.
as well.
And Brian? And Wendy's a yes. So thank you all. Appreciate you all staying late. And Dave, Alan, your comment about allowing sufficient time for liaison. We will make sure to allocate the right time. So appreciate you all